Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the DCC Dying Earth Kickstarter Twitch extravaganza. With me today, my name is Marc Brunner. I'm one of the writers on the project, and with me today is Terry Olson.
Hello, everybody.
And Jim Skatch.
Hello.
So we are here to talk about, in a little bit more depth than what we've done in the past shows, mechanics of DCC Dying Earth. And so we hope that we can illuminate some of the upcoming rules that some of you may have gotten a chance to play test or been a part of, or may have just been interested in as part of the Kickstarter, especially as they relate to the Vancification of DCC. And I think that Terry and I come from a certain perspective because we are both writers on the project. Jim has been heavily involved in the playtests for going back now several years. So
5 or 6, yeah.
So he's seen actually iterations of the rules kind of going, from some of the inception to some of the current status. And we are also hopefully going to pick up some questions in chat. So as you guys, have questions that you want to cover a specific topic, then we can get to that as well. So I know one of the things that, we were talking about before the show started was probably one of the highlights of, what the system for DCC Dying Earth brings is, what is magic in DCC Dying Earth, and what is the difference between that and normal DCC? And so I think that's where we might start with our conversation and sort of get into some of the details, especially the magician and Vat-Thing classes, which have a different approach to magic. And I'll just begin by saying a lot of what we were doing was trying to, get back to the source of what, Vance was, originally, right, for going back to all the way to the original Dungeons & Dragons, where there is a type of magic that's represented that is in some ways more Vancian than DCC, while at the same time the DCC elements are really more about the losing control of the magical energies, right? And that's also Vancian as well, but it's not like memorization and sort of fire and forget, that kind of terminology. And so really in my mind, Vance is kind of a combination of both those things, right? You have examples from the novels of, clearly the magicians are spending their lifetime studying spells. They're trying to, refine the magic. They're searching for like the, kind of the lost, spells of Fandal and some of the magicians of the past. But at the same time, there's this sort of like this ability to magic to get twisted, and, to come out wrong, Kugel and his malapropisms that get him, carried away to the northern shores, not once but twice. That those kind of things are nice because to me that's really a fun new way to explore it. That it's not quite DCC, it's not quite original Dungeons and Dragons. It's we're trying to make our own thing. And so to that effect, the magician and the Vat-Things use magic in a very Vancian way, in that both of these classes access magic after years of study and learning a single way of casting a spell. And that means that, when you are a first level magician or a first level Vat-Thing, you are making essentially one spell check that says, this is the way I've learned to cast, Featherfall, or the way I've learned to cast, Magic Missile. And that result is based on, a starting die, which is called your rote magic spell check die. That mechanic is intended to say, okay, at first level, you have the kind of capability to encompass this much of the spell's knowledge. And so you roll your spell check, you stick with that spell check, and you can always cast a spell at that level. In the mechanics, though, there are ways to modify and twist the magic if you risk it, to try to change the results as you're casting it. So it's not just that you're locked into that one spell result, but you have the ability to if you want to, if you really need that higher result, do some things, and we'll get into the details of what those are when you're casting spells. In addition, oh, go ahead, Terry.
Sorry,
yeah.
Mike. I was going to say, maybe you were about to say this, but even on that topic, one of the cool things about the mechanic, at least for the magician, is that spell check die. First of all, it can be re-rolled every level. So if you have a result that is not so great at first level, there's always a chance to change it when you level up. And also that spell check die increases, and it goes as high as a D30. So, you could be, if you're lucky and you roll a 27 or a 28, every time you cast that spell, it's going to be a 27 or a 28. And so a lot of DCC Dying Earth is about the long game in terms of character development. You know, you might not appreciate it in a one shot that you play, especially if it's a low level one shot, but some of these characters, the magician in particular, can be a powerhouse at higher levels.
Yeah, and go ahead, Jim. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, as Terry says, this is why I love this stuff, because I didn't even think about this until you just said it, Terry. If you think about one of the beautiful things about DCC from the very beginning was the way that spells were built in such a way, in a manner that you automatically were going to get better at that spell as your level went up, because your spell check was more likely to be a higher number because you were adding your level to it, right? Genius way to get away from things like greater magic missile or something like that is necessary in other versions of role-playing games. Think about how spectacular that still holds in this incarnation, because you can use that spell check die, that rote die, and you're going to get better every level. So you're still, that same mechanic is still holding true, even though it's being almost completely repurposed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and in increasing it every level, it's one of the things that it represents a very sort of, in my mind, advancing concept of you're studying and you're finding out more about the magic and
right
there, and you're learning a new permutation of the magic that that you got or acquired from some great master, and you're just uncovering more of those secrets, the underlying pattern, as it might be termed in some of the Vancian vocabulary. And so that we purposely kept the idea behind the Vancian magician, especially the low levels, is that it's very much similar to like the Turgeon character or the Mazarin character, where they are, they know, they may have a vast library of spells. And that's the other thing about the magician that's different than the wizard in DCC, is that the magician starts out with a very robust library of spells. Like they have access to a large number of spells, but they can only force a few of them into their mind each day, right? That's kind of the force of getting the magic to actually hold steady and make sure your concentration can hold. That's a very sort of Vancian concept as well. Yeah. And in that, but the idea that you also have this whole library of spells, that as a wizard you may only have 4 or 5 spells when you start. As a Vancian magician, you're more likely to have 10 to 12 spells that you can choose from. So it's a much more of a utility and versatile character, especially because maybe you do need that one time that you can cast mending, right? And you need that coming into this next day's venture, or going back to that ruin where you need to go and apply this. So that's a concept that's also kind of built in the magician class too, that's that kind of broadens their access to magic as well.
One of the things I really like about the system that I don't think we've spent a lot of time talking about are the exactitudes. So we're talking about like the amount of work that goes into learning a spell, memorizing a spell. And if you ever have to create a spell, there's a whole lot of work and money that goes into creating a spell. But um, when a magician or any spellcaster is trying to seek out this magical knowledge from someone else, the game has a system of these exactitudes that is sort of like when Pandaloom and Turgeon are bartering, right? And Turgeon wants to learn from Pandaloom how to instill this consciousness in the Vat-Thing, and Pandaloom's like, well, quid pro quo, Turgeon, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this table of exactitudes, and some of them, it's like a quest for it thing, but some of them are great. I'll just read one, with this one of the greater exactitudes, and that's recover an elixir inadvertently spilled in the sea. Right? What if someone asks you to do that? Right? You want to learn a spell? Say, I will teach you the spell, but first you have to get this elixir back that I spilled in the sea. It's awesome, right? That's a whole adventure right there.
Yeah, those are meant to be like kind of in the line of the quest for it. I really love that idea, DCC, and the idea that you may seek knowledge, and knowledge in the Vancian sense is pretty jealously guarded. There's feuding, magicians. There's associations that kind of group together and probably exclude those that don't match their membership, and the idea that, well, yeah, if you want to get our knowledge, we're going to make you go and do something of a challenging level that's equatable to the knowledge that we're giving. So that, the exactitudes are kind of a fun seed, and we put some examples in there. I think like of 30 exactitudes that that the judge can use when they're campaigning in this world.
And honestly, as someone who's not one of the author, I don't know where I'm pointing, one of the authors, the first thing I would do is I would take that list of exactitudes and I would create the outline of an adventure for each of them. Like day one, one or two paragraphs on each one of them, so that I always had it handy and ready to go. Because the whole point in my mind of playing the Dying Earth game is getting into that exact barter that you're talking about, or dealing with your animus, or some, you're always running from a crowd of people. You're always seeking out something that's just over the horizon. And so I would absolutely, as a judge, I would flesh out maybe even just 10 of them as the things that were my go-tos for, hey, this is the thing that's going to be picked. And so now I'm ready whenever it happens. That way you don't have to end the session to be like, oh no, now I got to figure out what to do about this exact, it's on the table, ready to go.
Yeah. I don't know, kind of on the other end of that, like we built into the character creation process, the idea that each character has some sort of background that is causing them to basically flee from their past, right?
Right.
It's very Kugel-esque, that he's sort of always running from one scrape to another. And so we have the starting animus, which is essentially a list of mini stories, right? Mini seeds for stories about what was the cause of you to go on the adventuring path or to join your current companions. And it's also meant to be a tool for judges in the similar vein, Jim, like where you might have be able to develop a backstory for this and say, okay, this is great, I can now fold this into my campaign and have it tie in, and I've all my if all my players have some starting animus, I can always pull that thread later on down the line, and it's kind of a cool way of involving that. But also you can maybe reward players for playing up that animus too with luck.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one thing
it's always better, the more strings you have attached to them.
So one thing I was going to go back to, though, which I kind of hinted at or talked about a little bit, was this idea that the magician is very methodical, right? They're the ones who they're not the sort of the wizard who is very creative with the magic. They're just the journeyman, and I think that's kind of like the novel is sort of referencing of that in many ways, that the magicians of current day are basically just people who just apply themselves and memorize and but they're not very creative. What happens though when you want to kind of risk the magic? And I think, Terry, maybe if you could talk a little bit about the concept of amplification dies and how that ties into the magician class.
Yeah, so the amplification is an important mechanic, and it's one of those mechanics that I think enhances the attractiveness of the magician, especially at low levels, and especially if your rote memorization die, perhaps that result isn't as good as you want it to be. And so with the amplification, essentially you have an up die and a down die, and those start out at D3s, but as you level up, they get larger. D4 is the second level, and so on. And the idea is, if you want, most of the time, if you want to amplify a spell, you can choose to, and you roll those two die. And if the up die is higher, then you add the result of the up die to your spell check. And if the down die is higher, then you subtract the value of the down die from your result. Now, if they both tie, the up die wins. If they both tie at the highest value, so if you're rolling D3s and you get 2 3s, then you get all 6 points. You don't just get 3 points. However, if you get snake eyes, then you lose the spell. And I think I don't know if we do object.
Yeah.
Misfires.
Yeah. So there's a risk, right? And there's a bigger risk of a misfire if you amplify than there would be otherwise. But it's a pretty fun mechanic, and it also gives us some opportunities. So for example, if you're casting a spell that takes a while and maybe you have to concentrate or something like that, if there's something that messes up your concentration, you know, I'm speaking the DCC rulebook sense where you have to make a will save. If you fail that will save, then we force amplification on you. You have no choice but to roll those dice and see what happens. Could be good, could be bad. Also, we have magic items, and I even think we have provenances, though I'm speaking off the top of my head now, but where we either increase the value of the up die separately or we increase the value of the down die separately. So maybe you have a cool magic items. So I know I wrote one at least where it's very good for a magician. You know, the magician can increase their spell checks with it, but it forces amplification on them and it boosts the value of their down die. So there's a lot of fun things you can do with the amplification mechanic to sort of mix up the casting process.
Yeah, and I love that the implication is sort of like this idea that you are trying to tap into like the knowledge that you may not have mastered quite, right? So it's similar to the DCC wizard in the sense, but you're still sort of like within a bound, right? Because you're starting from a known place and you're saying, okay, what are my ups and downs? But I need to risk it because I need to do this. But I love the idea that, you know, part of the mechanic is that sometimes you're forced to make amplification checks. And yeah, most of the time, you know, the odds are with you, you know, that the up die breaks ties and, you know, you get this big bonus that when you get, you know, high results, but there's a good percentage chance that you may have a lesser result as you know, being forced to do this amplification too. So just, you know, the magician is kind of a fun class when those things come into play. And the Vat-Thing works exactly the same way. They access magic just like magicians, but just to a lesser degree. They're not, unless they're and we can talk about the bad things in a minute, but essentially they're much more, you know, about, you know, what did my creator impart me with, rather than, you know, having this kind of years of study that went into their you know, their knowledge and mastery of magic.
The thing I love about it from a player judge perspective is the idea, just from a conceptual level, that you've got these magicians who are, you would think, almost be preternaturally lawful in nature, because everything for them is about learning these very intricate patterns that they have to imprint on their brain, and everything has to be perfect and everything has to be, you know, in the lines. And then in that split second, in the moment between when they release it from their head and when it actually manifests, all chaos breaks loose.
Mm-hmm.
Everything can go sideways in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic because you go from this kind of very structured, lawful thing to the possibility of sheer chaos in a wink of an eye.
Yeah, and we knew, as when you were writing this, is that we had to have a mechanic that represented sort of the memorization mechanic, but we also needed to have this option for the spell going wrong, right? Because
yeah, no, it's gorgeous.
DCC, and that's very much tied to DCC, and it's very much in Vance too, you know, where magic is one of these things that, you know, it's not always under your control, whether it's because you can't force enough into your brain or because you're misspeaking it, you know, the instant you're saying it. And so that's where we wanted to make sure that we had, you know, that the DCC flavor of it kind of comes out in that too.
Yeah. And again, speaking about the long game, right? Your high level magician is making a spell check roll with the D30, but then he's also got like a D10 amplification die, right? I mean, the results can be epic.
Well, and they also have the Sandesteins, and those are their own sort of like,
Right.
like crazy magic. So high level magicians are pretty powerful, you know, and so it'll be interesting to see, you know, some of the higher level games that get played out there, and what some of the fun results. But that's also very Vancian. You know, the magicians in Rialto's world are, you know, essentially demigods, you know, just, you know, they're all powerful, and they can do quite a bit with their magic.
Yeah, they're popping into pocket planes and crap like that all the time. Can you guys, so again, this is someone who hasn't, you know, I'm not an author and all this, but how does this stuff weave into things like the force of will and things like that? How does this all weave together kind of nicely? How does it all fit together?
Yeah,
it might get
I'll say that so one of the things that I really love about the books is the chapter in the Moraine chapter where they go and they find the this wizard who's been abandoned, or the magician who's been abandoned. He's the one who found the Ioun stones. I'm sure we'll have 3 different pronunciations of it during.
We look forward to your emails, right?
I own this stone.
Yeah, and so, but one of the things I really love about the character is that he basically gets so angry he just points at objects and they shatter, or they he just basically he is just raw magic is like sort of his tool, his go-to. And so we have this concept in terms of what if the magician class always had access to be able to sort of like burn personality in this case. So it's basically a magical spell that they can cast where it's not something they memorize, it's not something that that they learn from a book. It's just basically the raw fluctuation of magic going and channeling it towards like an enemy or towards an object. And it's in the rules, it's called force of will, and it's directly from the Moraine chapters. And essentially the magician at that point is saying, I'm going to give up some of my personality in a spellburn sense. I'm going to try to channel my magical energy. And they're making a regular DCC spell check, right? So they're rolling a d20, they're adding their personality spellburn, and there's a table of increasing amplitude of results. And that's a spell that all magicians have access to from level 1. And it's kind of just intended to be this outlet for a magician who kind of like Jim, you're saying, is that maybe there is a sort of like a moment in time where they're like, I realize that no matter how much preparation I've done, I need to just go back to accessing the rawness of magic.
Right.
And so that's the force of will is a concept that the magician also kind of like gives them that Vancian flavor in the sense of how it's described in the books in my mind.
Yeah, it's my favorite feature of the magician, bar none. I love force of will, and sadly in playtests I don't see people using it enough. So all you would-be magicians, use your force of will.
Yeah, I mean,
burn that personality to the ground.
Yeah, just reading the table, there's a small table of effects and so on. It looks just like a spell check table. For those of you familiar with DCC, which I assume is most. What's interesting to me is, those are the types of things, the things that are in that result table, that are the kinds of things that creative players can go nuts with.
Yeah.
And so I'm surprised you haven't seen it more. Terry, me, I tend not to play I tend to leave those to other people. Yeah. Who really get into that stuff. And I'll in this case, I'll go with the Wayfarer or the Vat-Thing or something like that when I'm play testing. I'm surprised you haven't seen it used more, because if I was a magician class, I would go nuts with that force of will.
Well, some people are a little shy about burning that personality, which I can understand in a sense, but it's going to come back. Burn that baby down. That's what I say, And if people think you are an unmannered clod with your personality of 4, they deserve everything that you give them.
What do they know?
Exactly. But
the one trick to that is that personality is not just a dump stat for a magician. Maybe not dump stat, in terms of like a DCC wizard. Personality doesn't really, it's not really used, right? It's intelligence, it's your stamina, strength, agility. This elevates personality into more prominence. But the other thing that we did with magician is that personality is also used for how much magic you can carry around in your head. It's like containing that magic is based on your personality, while learning the magic is based on your intelligence. And so there's a balance here. Force of will is a very powerful tool, but do it too much, and those spells that you want to retain in your head or memorize for the next day, you may have to wait a while before you recover enough to basically have the mental stability to hold to force those spells in your mind and keep them there.
I can relate to struggling with mental stability. You've got my attention.
Anything else you guys want to talk about for the magician, or do you want to talk about some of the other classes?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the other classes. Oh, okay. Sorry. One final thing, cool thing about the magician that we don't talk about very much, and that is that magicians don't make a recover the body or roll the body check what do you call it? They get reincarnated. And so you could have some interesting situations. I had a reincarnated magician in my playtest. They could come back as an animal. They could not come back at all. But anyway, reincarnation is like a unique magician mechanic that's pretty fun.
Yeah, and it's not like a spiritual reincarnation. It's like they have hid away some of their essence in like a secret lab, right? And they're trying to grow like essentially like a homoculi or whatever it is, and this is sort of like your chance to like what came out of the vat, right? And this, and so that's where the concept is that magicians are crafty bunches, and it's unlikely that they're going to go down easily. And so what kind of thing are they next sort of imbuing their their essence into? Sometimes that's not exactly what you would expect. So
and one of the results, and I would totally want to play in this game if Jim was running it, is if one of the reincarnation results that you come back as a familiar for one of your rival magicians, which is awesome. How much fun would that be?
It writes itself at that point.
Does.
You don't have to even prepare for the game next week. You just go with it.
All right, I won't talk about the magician anymore.
So moving on to the Vat-Thing. So one of the things I wanted to highlight about the Vat-Thing is that this idea that what's in the Vancian novels, the Vat-Things are the wizardly creations. They are Turgeon and the Pantaloon chapters are the ones that kind of explore that in a little bit more detail. But so we took that concept and said, okay, what would that mean as a character class? What does it mean to have like a sort of a pattern-based life, and also some in the books, obviously the flaws that the Vat-Things have. So most of the Vat-Things that come out of the Vats are not perfect. They have some deeply physical or mental flaw. And so as a Vat-Thing, we wanted to have that be an aspect of the character creation. So if you roll up the levels of a Vat-Thing, you also start with a flaw, some sort of hindrance. In most cases, it's a benign, I mean, not most cases, but there's several benign results. There's also several that are that could affect your gameplay, but there's also some the highest level, I think you come out a perfectly formed Vat-Thing, and there's no flaws. So it's kind of another nice random table. But the other thing, the idea is that this idea that when you're creating something, and when Turgeon goes and talks to Pantaloon and says, show me how to create life, essentially, and what are the different patterns, can I borrow your pattern for creating this life, so I can make a twin of her. So there's this concept of a Vat-Thing pattern, and so we sort of broadened that and said, okay, when a magician is creating this life, perhaps they want a more martial type creature in order to defend their manse, or maybe they want one that's more skilled in the sort of the beauty and the arts and those things, and then maybe they want one that's more of like a memory keeper, or like an encyclopedist. And so there are 3 Vat-Thing patterns that you roll up again with your level 0 character. Each of them change what your starting both your attributes are, as well as the other thing that you get as a Vat-Thing is a bonus die that you get to apply based on your pattern. So martial Vat-Things apply that bonus die, which progresses with each level to their weapon attacks, like similar to a warrior or dwarf. A Paragon Vat-Thing applies the bonus die to skill checks, right? So they become very versatile in terms of their ability to to take on kind of the thief like skill aspects of the party. And then the wizardly Vat-Thing is the one that adds their bonus die to their spell checks, their rote magic spell checks, when they're trying to memorize spells. So they can quickly become powerful, maybe even kind of equaling a magician in power, because that bonus die again increases over time. And so the Vat-Thing is intended to be not just one character class, but sort of like a shades of multiple character classes, which is kind of a fun element. And each of the Vat-Things actually has access to spells, even the warrior one. So it's kind of this very versatile class, but also inherits a lot of that creation from a creator who's invoking not just the life into it, but also teaching that its knowledge and so that it can serve it better.
Yeah, there's I really like the perspicacious learner, where any untrained skill check is a D16 for a Vat-Thing. which is kind of fun in a game sense. A lot of the times, in the Dying Earth games anyway, like Mark was saying, especially if you have a Paragon Vat-Thing where they're adding that Vat die to their skill checks, you always want the Vat-Thing to be to be checking for traps, doing whatever. To, have that Vat-Thing do it. And against, they're immune to poison and disease, which is always nice, right? Especially if you're checking for traps. But speaking to the long game again, and going sort of in the same vein as we were talking about when a magician dies, if you play your cards right and you survive long enough and you don't burn your luck down too low, a Vat-Thing can be practically immortal. Because we have a sort of something called no true life, no true death, and if you fail your luck save or your luck check during the roll of the body, you get one more check, and then you subtract your current luck from that roll. And if you make that one, then you show up in a vat back in your creator's lab, and you have all your memories. So if you're a 5th level Vat-Thing and you've got a luck of 15, it's looking pretty good that even if you die, you're going to come back, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also like kind of very dancing in my mind about magicians and certainly called out in the books, but bad things and kind of extrapolated is that these creatures can live thousands, millions of years, right? Even because their magic essentially gives them access to those kind of abilities, which is what we wanted to try to also impart to that class, and it's a lot of fun.
And imagine how bored they are. No, seriously, I mean, in a way it's like a strange elfin thing, right? Elves, the long-lived elves, and how they almost get tired of watching human societies rise and fall. Imagine being a Vat-Thing that's literally 750,000 years old, because you've been reincarnated, or no true life, no true death, maybe 20 or 30 times by that point.
Yeah.
And you're always sort of tied to your creator too.
Yeah.
This kind of bondage that you're in.
So I have a stack of character sheets from games I've played in recently on my desk, as one does. And I actually found the artificer that I had played, and it was a Vat-Thing, and he was a paragon, and he had 1d4 to skill checks, and he had the d16 untrained. And just for flavor, his Vat flaw was incomplete genesis. The PC is a boneless creature with pulsing surface of its brain exposed. Which I didn't realize until like a little way into the game. Like I didn't catch that that's what the thing was. But you are correct. And so then he was really good at getting through doors and traps and stuff, because he didn't have bones.
Oh man, I know. What's that X-Files episode? Wait, is it Toombs? There's like a character
the guy
named who can like squeeze through any kind of orifice because he had no bones. That's awesome.
So just just laying around, sitting on the desk, my Vat-Thing.
I hope that gets a lot of fun, with those flaws, that people take them and just, go with them and run with them. I think there was one story of a playtest that somebody was running where they had a similar sort of flaw, and they always had like they made it into like, the reason why they wore a helmet, because they had,
right, because your brain is exposed.
Yeah.
So it's a horrible flaw to have, but I played 2 or 3 Vat-Things. Not a ton of evolution in the rules, additions like the no true life, no true death, but the rules that existed from the very beginning seemed to be pretty stable. It was more additions that came on, to kind of model a certain piece of it. But they're a blast. Vat-Things are a blast to play. Because there's so much variation in them, based on those flaws and so forth, that it's a ton. It's really a very different character every time you get one.
Yeah.
And they can invoke creator, which is sort of fun, because you do have someone that made you. So that of course comes with the cost, but it can be a fun thing to pull off.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the Wayfarer a little bit, because I know this is a class that is very much drawn straight from Kugel and his adventures, and what we tried to do was, with Wayfarer, make it different from the thief, which is also going back to Gary Gygax and sort of his inspiration for the original thief in D&D. He was drawing on Kugel as a source for that, in addition to some of those Zelazny characters as well. But what we tried to do was say, okay, the Wayfarer, like Leanne in those chapters, he's clearly not a thief. He's much more of a braggart, much more of a sort of a dandy, right? And try to figure out, okay, this guy is probably not necessarily very good at sort of like the thief things, like the disabling traps, the locks, the searching for those things, but he's very good at talking his way out of situations or her way out of situations. He's very good at sort of these conversational gambits. And so the Wayfarer, one of the mechanics that I'm curious how it's going to get played, and because I don't think it's come up in a lot of the one shots, and it's much more for like a longer campaign, is they have a rhetorical deed die. So this idea that, similar to a mighty deed, you may be having a social situation where you want to, and we made it a choice because there's a consequence for when you fail when the deed die comes up a 1, but basically when you make a some sort of conversational gambit, you can add your rhetorical deed to that, and that gives you a bonus, right? So you get to potentially come away with something through the conversation that you wouldn't have normally gotten to do. However, if that deed comes up with a 1, it's considered to completely backfire, right? So the idea that if you're Kugel and you're trying to like talk your way out of a situation, and then suddenly you just say the wrong thing and everybody realizes what a fraud you are, that's kind of the mechanic that we wanted to go for there. And so there's in addition to the idea that you can fail these rolls, we also have a table of kind of suggested consequences, like examples of these things, and, that you can draw on as a judge to say, okay, not only did I fail this roll, but what happened next? How badly did I screw up this conversation? In addition to that, the Wayfarer is also very much based on luck, like this kind of luck mechanic of in the novels. What I would represent to is that Kugel can be very riding high one day, but at the end he also has a lot of lows. But what's interesting about that in my interpretation of it is that it's always at the expense of somebody else, right? Whether he's getting sort of dumped on or he's sort of bringing everybody down with him. And so one thing I thought we'd talk about a little bit is sort of the luck mechanic, what we call the supererogatory luck of the Wayfarer. And I know, Jim, you've played this class. Terry, you've obviously seen playtests of this, but kind of going into the thoughts about that mechanic and sort of the background of how it got developed.
Eric, if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump in just real quick.
Please.
So the very early iterations of the Wayfarer did not have the supererogat that luck. I even Googled it and looked up how to pronounce it and practiced before I got it, and I still can't do it.
If you take a spoonful of sugar, anyway. Sorry.
So it didn't have that. It was a different method of that kind of luck. The other thing I will say, I was immediately drawn to the Wayfarer. If for those of you who know me, when I tend to be in con games, I tend to take the last character left on the table, whatever it is. I don't care. That's fine. This was one of the few cases where I jumped and took the Wayfarer right off the bat when we started. It has changed quite a bit. I will say that the first play test that I was ever in with a Wayfarer, we did have something akin to the rhetorical deed die, and we never got to the adventure. we ended up spending all of our time in the town. I remember negotiating with the talking horses for beer, forget how much beer it would take for them to carry us to our destination. And it was all based on the fact that my Wayfarer did not want to walk. And so I was doing everything I could to get mounts for the next day for our sojourn out to the where the actual adventure was supposed to take place. So I shouldn't say that. I think we actually got there, but I think we only had like an hour of adventuring because all hell broke loose, all based on some ones that were rolled and the rhetorical stuff. So it's a fantastic thing. It's going to be interesting to see how it does play out, because it does require a bit of this is one of those places where just making skill checks is not really going to fill the void that you have in your life for not playing a Wayfarer. When you play that Wayfarer, you really need to embody that Wayfarer. And if you do, and you use these rhetorical deeds, you're going to have a blast. It means you're going to have to, I think it runs better if you really take hold of it and make the arguments, not just roll the dice. You're gonna have to, in those social situations, do the things that you would want the character to do in a story, and it'll run fantastically. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Regarding the you want me to speak a little bit on the luck burn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe explain a little bit and for folks and.
All right. Yeah. So the thieves, or the Wayfarer, sort of has Freudian Vancian slip. Three kind of main luck mechanics that sort of all intertwine to create this very dynamic, entertaining situation of the games. The first is that when a Wayfarer spends luck, there's a number of dice similar to a thief, a DCC thief, that add to the roll. So if the Wayfarer spends 1 point, then he adds 1 point. If the Wayfarer spends 2 points, then she adds 2d2. If the Wayfarer spends 3 points, then they add 3d3, and so on. So, 8 points is 8d8. So the Wayfarer can get a huge bonus to a roll. And by the way, those of you that are playing Wayfarers, add this to damage. I see a lot of people add it to skill checks. Forget that. Just wait till you hit something and damage the bejesus out of it. Add it to damage. All right. But anyway, with that editorial aside, so a Wayfarer can spend a lot of luck and have a very huge impact. The second thing is that in the game, we track how much luck the party burns. So anytime someone burns luck, there's a pool or a cumulative luck burn. That's just for you, Jen Brinkman. That grows as we as different members of the party burn a luck. Every time someone in the party burns luck, the Wayfarer makes a luck check against that cumulative burn. All right. So the Wayfarer starts off with a luck die. And every time that luck check die, I should call it, every time there's a failure, that luck check die goes down. Every time there's a success, that luck check die goes up. All right. So what happens is someone will burn a point of luck. The pool's at 1 point. The Wayfarer makes this luck check. There's no chance he or she is going to get a 1, and so they fail. All right. That 1 point of luck doesn't come from the PC that burnt it. It comes from the Wayfarer. All right. So now the Wayfarer is already very pleased with this PC who just took a point of their luck and used it for their own inferior purposes. All right. So as the game proceeds, more people burn luck. Maybe that pool's at 2 or 3, and the Wayfarer's luck die has now descended, and maybe it's a D14, but still the Wayfarer can't get that luck check, and more of the Wayfarer's luck is taken, much to the Wayfarer's chagrin. These amateurs are spending luck and they don't know how to do it, and it's her own luck at that. But then comes the big bad, right? It inevitably, towards the end of the adventure, there's the big thing, and that's when, especially for the one shots, the magician cashes in and says, "Oh, I'm gonna burn 9 points of luck," whatever. And so then the Wayfarer's luck dies down to a D12, we'll say, and now the pool is at an 11, right? What's going to happen? And so the Wayfarer finally succeeds on that check. The Wayfarer gets all that luck back, everything in the pool, including the pool that was spent. Although we can't go above the Wayfarer's natural luck maximum, but whoever spent that luck doesn't get to use it. It goes to the Wayfarer. Some people initially in playtest have thought of that as stealing. I don't like to think of it as stealing. I like to think of it as reappropriating. The Wayfarer has a better idea of how that luck can be spent. you know, the Wayfarer is going to do huge damage if the Wayfarer is being played right by using that luck themselves. And so the Wayfarer just decides they have a better use for that luck than you do, and takes it as they should. And so it makes for a super fun mechanic. I mean, sometimes there's some slight disappointment at the table, but usually there's tons of laughter of something gone amazingly wrong while the Wayfarer is snickering in revenge for all his past slights of luck being taken.
Yeah, and what I really like about that mechanic is that, you know, the party is at this point, they're getting this free luck because it's coming from the Wayfarer until that table's turn. And like you said, usually in the playtest that comes at this a very inopportune moment, you know, where it's like I really need this effect. What we've wasted all this kind of like building up the luck pool, and then suddenly, you know, it gets turned around on us. But to me, that's a mechanic that really reflects my sense of the novels, right? In terms of, you know, Kugel is always getting sort of like, you know, people taking things away from him that are rightfully, you know, his,
right.
in a sense.
And then finally,
yeah,
right. In the very end, he's going to take something back, and it's going to release, you know, the giant, you know,
Yep.
creature from the lake. And it's, for me, coming up with a mechanic, and we've seen this in playtests where that sort of plays out, and the mechanic sort of lifts that to, you know, to the narrative point. That's what we're trying to do. You're right, Terry. I think it can be a little you know, weird for players at first, because it's much more, DCC is not about like these sort of direct confrontations, right, between PCs, and we create
tell that to Haley.
and except for Haley. But now what we're trying to do is create these sort of, you know, these opportunities for this narrative interaction that, you know, it's not all about PvP combat and things like that. We're trying to like I said, create the story element, and this luck mechanic between the Wayfarer, I think, is a good balance between that. You know, that's it. And I like the way it plays out in the playtest, where, you know, the party, you know, gets away with something for a while until it bites them in the ass. You know, and
Yeah, I should say that, you know, the original Wayfarer did have a mechanism like this.
Mhm.
But I don't recall having to check. I think in the very beginning, it was a decision that the Wayfarer was making,
Yeah, it was.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
whether or not they were going to give up that luck to let that person burn it. And then at some point, they basically could pull luck back from other people when they wanted it. So I think, in a way, what this mechanic does is it removes that layer of that could turn into PvP.
An adversarial sort of
Yeah,
thing.
an adversarial situation, and places it more in the square in the wheelhouse of DCC, which is decisions and consequences, actions and consequences, risk and consequences. So you'll notice I love consequences. So that is a rule that I think definitely evolved into where it is now, and probably for the much better, because as much fun as it was in those first couple of tables that I played in, you had a lot of people that were very big Vancian fans. I mean, these were people who, you know, they were there to play Dying Earth Vance, and they understood it at a really deep level. And so a lot of that stuff that could end up in player versus player or adversarial was just kind of left off to the wayside, because we were all just we knew that that's what it was trying to model, that Kugel thing where the luck was kind of weird like that. I think for a broader release where you're going to get people who are playing it in a lot of different situations, this kind of is a really good way to remove that. It's a little more complicated, but it's a better way to handle that and remove the adversarial aspects that could crop up.
Yeah, and I see a little concern in the chat about people worried that it sounds complicated. If it sounds complicated, that's my fault. Certainly, you know, when we've done play tests, people have gotten it right off the bat. Certainly by the second luck check, it's ingrained in folks, and you know most of it already. You know how a thief's spending of luck changes with the luck die. So that's sort of a similar mechanic, and you know about making luck checks. The only thing you need to sort of track is how much luck's been spent and who's taking luck from whom. And my example probably was overly complicated, but you don't need to worry about it. I think all of you, especially the experienced judges, like some of the ones I see concerned, you're going to get it right off the bat. It's going to be easy.
Yeah, I'd put a big bowl in the middle of the table and make people put M&Ms in it every time they spent luck.
Nice.
Well, there's also in the character sheet that we came up with also has, basically the two things you need to track. It's on the Wayfarer sheet, which is, what is my current luck die? So if you're familiar with, it's just basically, saying, okay, what am I at? Am I at a D20? Am I at a D16? So that's something you can keep track of on your own character sheet. And then also, what is the cumulative party luck burn? And that's just a table, a column of numbers that you just mark off like you would disapproval. And so those two numbers are basically all you need to really keep track of, this, and the judge reminding people that, okay, you're burning luck. Wayfarer, make a luck check. You didn't get it, you lose the luck. You got it, you get all that luck back, and that's.
But how am I going to get M&Ms then, Mark?
Stay tuned for our next Twitch. How can Jim get M&Ms? You need to, check this out, Jim. If you want M&Ms, you need to be nimble. How's that for a segue?
Nice, very good. I got to use my finesse.
Two more things real quick on the Wayfarer. Nimble, you just mentioned. So there's an aspect of Wayfarers which one of the things I kind of wanted to have is this kind of this, that the character is good at taking advantage of opportunities, right? And so one of the things that they can do as a class is jump themselves ahead of the initiative order for a round of initiative, basically taking advantage of some opportunity in a narrative sense. But they can do that one time per combat. However, once they use that ability, they fall to the very last of the initiative order. So that's great for a character that's trying to achieve something that has to get done really quickly. They have this kind of versatility to them. So that's called their nimble ability. And the other thing that I think that's been really fun in playtest go ahead, Terry, you're gonna say
sorry,
something.
just a quick anecdote. In my adventure, I have one room where there's this crazy, super duper scary looking plant creature. And I think in 6 out of 7 playtests, well, certainly all of the playtests except for one, the Wayfarer has used that nimble ability to shut the door. So they open the door, they go, we roll initiative, and the Wayfarer's like, I'm going to jump in front of initiative and shut the door. It happens every time, except for one time.
Who was the one time, Terry? Do you know?
I don't remember the player's name, unfortunately. It was someone new to me.
The other thing that's been really fun in playtest, at least my playtest, is that there's this there's a minor magician ability for the Wayfarer, where they have the ability similar to a thief, where they can cast magic from scrolls, but we actually made it to where they can memorize magic like a magician, and this is again like Kugel trying to learn a spell. So they can learn a spell and memorize a spell, one spell, because they're not magicians, they're sort of amateurs at this. The key is though that whenever they memorize a spell, the judge is the one that makes the spell check and doesn't tell them what the result is until they try to cast the spell. And so it's led to very fun situations where the Wayfarer, is carrying around this sort of like, what they think is a trump card, but it turns out to be, a misfire, or it could be, just, ineffectual, or it could be like this really super high result that, may go off.
Right. Burns the party to the ground.
Or it could take them right back to where they started.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The last class that we have to talk about is the Witch, and I know this is one that's also been kind of fun in playtest because it's another class that in the Vancian sense there's there's witches, but what does it mean to be a witch in the DCC sense? We wanted witches to have a unique flavor that doesn't make them wizards, doesn't make them magicians, gives them their own sort of personalities. And so a lot of the witch is sort of built around this idea that you have a pact entity, similar to like a deity you might have as a cleric, but it's basically somebody, some creature or entity that you have given yourself over to in order to empower your magic. But it's more of a dark magic, right? It's more of a, in the sense of most of the the entities that you might be doing this with are probably demonic or things like that, although you can have lawful versions of them. It's just, a lot of this is sort of more flavor to that witch class being, sort of the kind of the Sabbath witch, right? In terms of their progression. And so there's a couple aspects that we built in this class that, make them sort of, a different take on, a wizard, like a dark cleric type thing. That's both to do with their ability to transfer vitality from creatures and give it to either allies or to themselves as kind of a darker take on the healing magic of a cleric. So in this case, they can't just draw upon the power of their deity and say, heal this thing or this ally of mine. They have to steal it from some other source, and whether that's a creature that they encounter and they get the opportunity to do that in an unwilling creature, or they can do it from a willing ally giving up points of their own vitality in order to heal one of their companions. And so this idea that there's kind of a ritualistic aspect to their magic is also imparted in some of the other things that we have for their class. And I know Terry and Jim, I don't know if you've played a witch before in any of the play tests, but Terry, you might, if there's some other things you want to highlight about the witch class or some of their mechanics that haven't been gone into too much detail before.
Sure. I guess the first thing I would say is, if you are the type of person that doesn't like the cleric peanut butter inside your fantasy game chocolate, then the witch is the class for you, because the witch has a mix of arcane spells and cleric spells, so they have sort of a unique combination of spells at their disposal. And this transfer vitality is a really nice compromise in terms of having some way to heal people, but it's its own thing for sure. And witches are especially good at curses or squalms, as we call them. And so we got to write a bunch of curses for the game, and you'll find some pretty entertaining ones that the witch can throw down on people and just make their lives generally miserable. I don't know, Jim, do you got something you want to throw in?
Well, I have not played a witch. It's one of the few classes for Dying Earth that I haven't played. I will tell you this: every time I've been at a table where a witch was chosen, virtual or in person, I have been completely creeped out by the witch. They are
you can't get a better selling point than that, right?
Yeah, it's a really good class. You guys did a great job with it. I keep saying like someone did it. You guys did this. You did a really nice job with it, because it does kind of squick me out when I'm playing with them. They truck with demons, and they're pulling life out of one thing and giving it to another, and it's a little creepy. And everybody seems to take that to its full embodiment when they're playing the characters. So the characters end up being kind of creepy and stuff. So it's and that's coming from me, who, if you've ever seen me play Septus on Blades Against Bandwidth, it's creepy as all hell. So it's really, you guys did a great job with it, because it's creeping out to the point that I've not played one. I don't want to play a witch.
Well,
thanks. That's good to know.
Yeah, and sort of the flip side of that is that the witch, is it can be this versatile character, and you can make it very dark and creepy, or you can make it, the lawful version of a witch would be, sort of the more, maybe their rituals are much more about, sanctifying, something, rather than, making, selling the soul to their demon lord or things like that. But there's this concept that kind of similar to a cleric, where over time, a deity can become disapproving of their actions, whether it's, they find them unworthy. Well, the twist for the witch is that, well, not only can the deity or the pact entity they have sort of find fault with the witch, but the way that they show that is that they transform and corrupt the witch into, versions of themselves, whether that's more demonic or more sort of, in sort of the heavenly sense, right? Sort of, whatever that lawful, deity that you or pact.
Whatever you need to tell yourself to sleep at night, Mark.
Exactly.
Yeah, that one.
We just made a dark witch. That's what we did. but there's this, what they encounter is demonic taint and demonic corruption, which is, over time, over a long campaign, essentially your witch is going to become this this kind of more and more like their pact entity in some way, and that can be both good and bad, but it's meant to, you know, be a transformative element of that, you know, that relationship with their pact entity getting closer and closer until they're essentially subsumed by it.
Right. You bring me closer to God. I get it.
Speaking of demons, though, one of the things about the witch that's probably worth saying is they start with some pretty high level spells. So, you know, a first level witch has access to demon summoning, which is a third level wizard spell, right? I mean, most DCC wizards wouldn't see something like that until level 5, unless you're playing in Jim's game. But you know, also they have curse, which is a second level cleric spell. So witches have very early access to some of these powerful spells. Of course, they're harder to cast, but the results can be huge, right? How many times at first level do you get to say, all right, well, I'm gonna summon a demon and bring him into this next room? You know, it's pretty fun.
See, I just want I want to point out in the chat, Jen gets it perfectly. Someone was killed in combat and the witch just snuck up behind everyone else and slid the body back between and then used it as a sacrifice to cast a spell. Now, if that's not going to creep you out at some level, no matter what you're doing, that to me is like, that's the embodiment of it, and it's perfect. And it's this weird thing where I'm both in awe of the way you guys instantiated it, and also like, really, you should see somebody professional.
Yeah, Scott Hickerson, I want to play in a game with you, man.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, a lot of this is just like our take on, you know, what's in the novels. And, you know, the witch was always this sort of like mysterious, you know, it presented sort of like a mysterious, you know, Javine, you know, creature, or you know, that the lith in these kind of ghostly elements. And it's a really cool sort of like part of the stories without being at the forefront. And what we're trying to do is what would that mean to be like a player character, and how do we make that, you know, that feeling. So some of the things that we're talking about in the witch are just our time of extrapolating that, but I think we hopefully got the kind of the feel that are coming out of the Vance novels of the sort of the darker side of magic, you know, that probably a proper magician would never want to associate with. And you know, that's something that, you know, judges can sort of like figure out in their own campaigns, like how do they want this to play out, you know, especially if there's a witch in a party.
Yeah, and the witch has to be able to hold their own against the magician, because in the sort of the Vancian lore, there was a huge war between the two that was very costly. And so in that vein, we have to imagine high-level magicians and high-level witches. How are they going to stand toe-to-toe with these very different abilities? And I think it's there. You know, you can. Who's going to write that adventure? The war of the magicians and witches.
Stretch goal, I think. So we've talked for a good bit. I hopefully we've gotten some, you know, more details of the character classes. What I'd want to do is, you know, certainly Terry, Jim, if there's other things that you guys want to talk about, or if there's questions from folks in the chat, you know, we can certainly take some time to try to address, you know, the input from some of the players and some of the people who are fans.
Well, you know, I doubt it's a, you know, I'm revealing too much behind the Wizard of Oz curtain, but, you know, we always kind of talk about what we're going to talk about before we talk about it on these things. And the one that I brought up was the Grudge.
Oh yeah.
I think, Mark, if you go ahead and explain Grudge tokens, I think some people's minds are going to be blown, because I really think it's something you don't see a lot, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, so the Grudge token is this concept of, well, what if you know, there's always these situations that you get into in games where, you know, you can burn luck to affect your rolls. You know, you always are sort of master of your own destiny. And then the Langmar introduced fleeting luck, where you could essentially have this sort of reusable mechanic of, well, I can sort of, now I can take these luck tokens and they're a little bit more portable and I can use them, but there's also this kind of fun mechanic of play back and forth based on the success of the dice or the failures of the dice, that, you know, that they all get swept away. Well, in the Vancian terms, what I was trying to think of, and what we talked about when we were writing this, is that what is a kind of a Vancian thing? Well, it's this idea that you may have some resentment built in, and this is something that, you get something that happens to you, so that sort of builds up over time. You build this grudge, you build this spite, you build this, resentment. So you have this kind of growing collection of tokens, and this is an optional rule because it can lead to some dynamics that some judges may not want in their campaigns. But basically, every time you roll a fumble, you get a grudge token. This is you feeling like the implications of life are sort of stacking up against you, and this represents your sort of the physical tokens are the kind of the bank that you have of all these kind of minor things that have happened to you over time. The way you spend a grudge token is that you can change or you can force anybody who makes a successful roll to re-roll that roll by spending a grudge token. And that's anybody, that's any player or the judge. So the key thing that
whose idea was that? Can't make me re-roll.
So that's kind of the new mechanic that I think is really intriguing, for us as designers, but also I think hopefully for players and judges, is this idea to influence the judges' rolls, right? Which is something that's been not part of luck, not part of like the traditional mechanics of DCC, and the idea that you can't guarantee they're going to fail it, but you make them re-roll. And this has come up in situations where the judge gets a great result, the players can't do anything about it. Well, now you have a grudge token if you're playing with those in your game. And it really is like a literal interpretation of the Vancian sort of stories about I'm spending essentially my resentment to force you to re-roll, and that could obviously be something where if you use it against another player, hopefully that's a fun element to your game and your group is into that, right? Where it becomes this kind of thing like, well, you kind of gave me this minor tweak over here, so I'm going to make you do that. But I think a lot of it is this kind of judge player interaction, right, where the party now has the ability to sort of get a force like a narrative to change based on the terms of all the things that they built up that resentment for in the past. And so that's kind of the mechanic in a real short summary. And I've seen it play out in my playtest, with a lot of fun things, where the judge is suddenly having to re-roll something that would have may have killed a player or may have caused a TPK. So this is kind of like a neat way to say every time you get that natural fumble, you're going to get something that you can bank and potentially use to influence the game later on. So I think it's a fun mechanic. I think it's very, very much in the Vancian theme, and it's its own take on what sort of the evolution of luck and fleeting luck, and now kind of the Vancian interpretation of that.
So much fun.
I can't wait. I know I get, I come off as the really tough judge, but that to me is so fantastic that, like you said, Mark, it embodies this. I'm taking on this, the horrible things that are happening to me. I'm going to get, it's like a revenge token. Like I'm going to get my revenge at some point. I'm just going to bank that all of this badness. And just to dig into it a little more, you can spend more than one grudge token. So if you spend more than one grudge token, not only do they have to re-roll, but you can make them, you're changing the die that they're using.
Right.
So let's say they were going to attack you with a D20. It's an action to D20, and you spend 2 grudge tokens that you've built up because you've had a bad day with the dice. Now you can make them re-roll it and re-roll it on a D16.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's very similar to fleeting luck in the sense that you can't guarantee you're going to have the grudge tokens, because as soon as you get that success, that natural 20, you get all your grudge tokens are taken away. So it becomes this very fluid mechanic, where you
spend it if you got it.
You spend it if you got it. You can't wait until the very end. So you've got to, that 20 could come up and you could be, you could lose all your built up grudge because you suddenly got that success. So it's very intuitive for players, in terms of like how this works. The one thing that it's just re-emphasized over and over again, you can only spend it on a successful roll. You can't make a grudge, against somebody's failure, because what you're doing is you're taking it out against their success. You're kicking them off their pedestal, and seeing what happens.
Right. It's all the worst of human emotions wrapped up in a little grudge token. So some people might know why I love it so much.
I guess the one thing that I would close with, it sort of touched on it earlier, is back to this concept of the long game. One thing I love about the rule set of DCC Dying Earth is that if you played in a one shot, it's great and it feels Vancian and there's so much fun to be had, but you really are seeing just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many mechanics that are focused on campaign play that won't even come into a one shot. There's so many things you can do in the game that are sort of, once you look through the rules, are spelled out for you. That really, Jim was talking about with the exactitude, sort of writing small paragraphs with what those are. I mean, you could quickly map out a campaign just from going through these exactitudes, and once you get into the possibilities of demonic taint, and you get into wizardly objurgations, and you get into spell creation and all these other mechanics that are sort of having long lasting effects, it's just a great system to build a campaign on, in addition to the one shot mayhem that you get to have with it. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's a fun double-edged sword that I think distinguishes it a little bit from some other systems.
So I'm just going to ask a real quick question on what, because I'm not going to let you stop on that, Terry. One of the things that I've seen over the years in the various forums and Facebook postings and whatever is that people have a difficult time grasping the idea of kind of the long consequences of things, right? They're always thinking about that short-term thing, and boy, this is overpowered because look, the wizard could just spellburn everything and then they're done, right? And that's difficult to understand why those mechanics are so important until you look at it from that 5-year campaign, right?
Yeah.
Is one of the things that comes along with Dying Earth a more explicit kind of understanding in the rules about how these things impact that long-term campaign, or is it something that you're going to get a feel for in the same way you do with the base core rule system?
I would say more so. Yeah, it does. I would say more so than the core rule system.
Okay.
For sure. Obviously, your mileage may vary, right? It depends on the reader and what they take out of it. But I do think that the DCC core rule set is more heavily weighted to the one shot experience in terms of how much of it you see during a one shot. I think you see more of core DCC in a one shot proportionally than you see in DCC Dying Earth. I think in DCC Dying Earth there's a lot more to be seen.
I think it's also people who are fans of Vance, and particularly fans of like embodying at the table. You talked about this a little bit, Jim. Like the kind of the pedigree of the classes, right? What you're going to find is that those groups in particular are probably going to spend, they're going to be less interested in terms of relative DCC players versus DCC Dying Earth in sort of like the dungeon crawl mechanic. It's going to be a lot more about those social situations, or those kind of exploring the feeling of the novels and the books. And that's there, right, for those groups that want to do that. We're also not getting away from DCC. Clearly there's a lot of groups that just want to take sort of the Vancian approach to combat and discovery and ruins, and you can do that. But I think there's this, that just because you're coming at it from a novelistic point of view, you're probably going to get tables that are similar to like that playtest experience that you're talking about, where you don't have to go on an adventure. You can spend the whole time in town and have a pretty satisfying experience because people are
burn down an inn, let all the horses free, no more beer left. Right. Yeah, you can do that.
And then run to the next town, right? Where
and then you're basically you're running at that
yeah,
point. Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be its own kind of like sort of fun, but it's that sort of lends itself to like a longer campaign in a sense too, I think, or more sort of less about the specific mechanics in combat and
more organic maybe. Yeah.
Okay. And I think there's a certain extent, but it will be based on the points of the view of the player and the judge and the campaigns. But certainly having the novel as a backing, there's a framework to this, is going to lend itself to that. I think more so than just what the core book of DCC has for it.
Hey, let me field a quick question in chat from Dr. Moggs, who says, "What Vance books should I read?" Judge Jan answered, there are 4 in the Dying Earth series.
All of them.
Of those 4, there's one that you should not read first, and that is titled either Kugel Saga or Kugel and the Skylark Spatterlight. You should not read that first. You should read that after Eyes of the Overworld. All right, so that because those 2 are back to back, and the second takes up right where the first one ended. But the others you can read in any order.
Yeah, and I would recommend starting with the collection, and because that's basically all 4 Dying Earth short novels. They're a bunch of a series of short stories essentially, for a lot of them that you can get, and it's a large book, but it's that's the version that I read when I first picked up Vance many years ago. It takes you through essentially the progression of some of the early works that Vance was writing in the 60s and 70s until the later stories of Rialto and the Magicians.
And your vocabulary will never be the same. And then you can go on to Gene Wolfe and do some of the Book of the New Sun, because there's like a direct line between the 2.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered quite a lot. Obviously, there's more to discover in terms of the rule books and the mechanics, but hopefully we gave a little bit more information to players and fans, and certainly enjoyed the conversation with both you, Terry and Jim.
Likewise, Mark.
I appreciate you guys having me on as just a fan. So.
Well, thank you so much for all the valuable playtest feedback you've given us over the years too, and really excited that we're finally getting to a point where we can get it, in front of the larger world. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know, but someone said that the Kickstarter might be going live soon. Has anyone checked on that to make sure it's live? Is that live yet? Jen, is that live? Yeah, and back at lots. I know I did.
Yep, so the link's in the chat.
Yeah, and I know that there's going to be some more Twitch shows this week and next, but I think the one that probably a lot of the Kickstarter backers are looking forward to is Friday evening. We're going to have a stretch goal Kickstarter Twitch show, I think, to go over the details of some of the upcoming stretch goals that we've already unlocked and surpassed, and the future ones to come.
Great. Now I'm going to have to get 3 of them.
Right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me, and thank you all so much for all the fans and folks that are on the Twitch stream and comments. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Thanks, everybody. Good night.